Do you sleep when you're supposed to be awake? Are you usually awake when you're supposed to be sleeping? How's been your sleeping in general for the past few days? Or the past few weeks? Or months? Or for the last 3 years? Do you have insomnia? Or the total opposite, hypersomnia? If you're studying in China, you'll know exactly why I chose today's topic. I think it was until after I came to China that I started paying attention to my sleeping habits. Before that, I would just wake up and go to sleep at the same time every day. And I think my responsibilities required me to have strict sleeping routines. And as some of you may know, I used to work the graveyard shift for almost 2 years back home, meaning that I was working from 12 a.m. to 7 a.m., sleeping in the mornings and going to school anytime in the afternoon or evenings. So I had to be very religious about my sleeping habits because otherwise I wouldn't be able to function properly. But then in China, I started noticing how frequent you would see or hear about people with sleeping problems. And now that I think about it, there's so many reasons why foreigners in China might have messed up sleeping habits. At one point, my sleeping problems in China got so bad that I had to go see a doctor. And let me tell you how my poor sleeping patterns almost end up killing me. Welcome to China University. This is Chimsey, your student advisor. In this podcast, I will not only talk about the many professional, academic, and personal growth opportunities this country has to offer, but also I'll mention some of the major obstacles foreign students encounter while living in China. I'll share my experience, thoughts, and opinions along with some realistic advice and genuine encouragement. Remember that you can now listen to full episodes not only on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, and where you can find me as China University Student Advisor. But you can also find me on Facebook and Instagram as China University Podcast and Twitter as chinauniversitypodcast. If you have any feedback, comments, or topic ideas, please feel free to contact me on your favorite social media platform or send an email to chinapodcast@outlook.com. Anyway, welcome to today's episode, Sleeping Habits in China. What do you do before you close your eyes? I'm not gonna lie to you. It's usually very easy for me to fall asleep, but not without a little ritual. In my case, it usually begins with me convincing myself that watching boring videos on YouTube would make me fall asleep faster. And that's how I usually ended up watching an hour-long documentary about the history of pencils, or tutorials on how to peel oranges with your fingers. But the problem is that sometimes those videos turn out to be fascinating. Now, during my first year in China, I think that most of my classmates had no sleeping problems, but there were like 3 of them in particular that clearly had sleeping problems. And I think they were different examples of why people might not sleep or oversleep in China. But they all had one personality trait in common, and that personality trait is known as sensation seeking. But before we jump into talking about this trait, I have to apologize to the millions of listeners that follow my podcast closely because there was no episode last week, and it was because I was sick. The first 2 days, I could almost swear I had COVID, especially because I ate stinky tofu and I liked it. I couldn't smell a thing, but my friends could. One of them even rushed straight to the restaurant right after trying it for the first time. But anyway, after 4 days of consecutive and negative COVID tests, my anxious self decided to believe in science rather than in my gut feeling. But I'm still recovering, so please excuse me if my voice sounds like I'm going through puberty again. Plus, I don't think many people realize that the 20 minutes or so that you listen to require around 8 to 10 hours of preparation. The other day, my friend told me that I'm a one-man army because I do the research, planning, writing, recording, editing, publishing, and social media all by myself. So if you listen all the way through, wow, thank you very much. But yeah, sensation seeking. I had to research this topic a lot because even though I had sleeping problems in China, the problems were a little unusual. But we'll talk about that later. But I really got to tell you, I didn't want to make this episode about his sleeping habits and sleeping problems just to tell you things like, you can't sleep because you have anxiety, or yes, you should go to bed earlier, or it's good to wake up early in the mornings. Because even though these are facts, they're also boring platitudes. So that's why I want to talk about the less obvious reasons we have sleeping problems, like sensation seeking. First of all, what is sensation seeking? According to the magazine Psychology Today, sensation seeking, also known as thrill seeking or excitement seeking, is the tendency to pursue new and different sensations, feelings, and experiences. The trait describes people who chase novel, complex, and intense sensations. There are 4 components that define sensation seeking, which are experience seeking, thrill and adventure seeking, disinhibition, and boredom susceptibility. But for practical purposes, I will only talk about experience or novelty seeking and boredom susceptibility. Like I said before, these are not the only or main reasons why people have messed up sleeping habits in China. People with anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, and other medical conditions can experience insomnia or hypersomnia. But in this episode, I didn't want to talk about things you probably already knew. In China, there will be 2 types of students: those who just arrived and those who have been in China for a while. But based on my experience, I know that both will experience some sort of sleeping problems. For example, remember the 3 classmates? So the thing is that one of them was living 2 lives at the same time. During the day, he would go to class and hang out with friends afterwards. But during the night, he would text and have phone calls or video calls with friends and family back home till very late. And he would do this on a daily basis. So it was a matter of time before his body would stop functioning properly and would either sleep all day or not go to class or come to class but fall asleep right away. When he finally stopped calling back home so often, he still struggled to fall asleep. So he decided he was going to work out to exhaustion. But even though he got ripped and would end up extremely tired every time, he still didn't manage to have a good sleep. I guess it was the adrenaline rush after such an strenuous workout that was preventing him from falling asleep. Now, how about the second classmate? Well, the problem with this classmate is that she was very conscientious about her studies, but she refused to reduce her social interactions and activities after class. She had lots of friends and a boyfriend, and she wasn't a party girl. She was more of a let's go to the mall today kind of girl than a party girl. And if you didn't get the How I Met Your Mother reference, go on YouTube now, not now, but after you listen to this episode, and search for Let's Go to the Mall by Robin Sparkles. But yeah, where was I? Oh yes, she was a very social person, but at the same time, when it came to studying, she was very industrious. Her study methods proved to be effective, but inefficient in the long term. She was pulling all-nighters and studying all the class materials in advance so she could chill in class and pass tests effortlessly. But then she would go to class in the morning and experience massive headaches and fall asleep in class. But she would always answer the teacher's questions and get the highest marks in the class and then go back to sleep. And you know what? Teachers would let her get away with sleeping in class while no one else could close their eyes for a second without being reprimanded. But yeah, we'll talk about positive discrimination in another episode. The thing is that her desire for new experiences and new social interactions was stronger than her desire to sleep. This turned out to be detrimental for her mental and physical health because during holidays, summer, and winter vacations, when we didn't have to go to class, her biological clock had already adjusted to her sleeping habits. People would often see her going for walks after midnight, doing her laundry, or picking her Wai Mai at 3 or 4 a.m. Then there's the third classmate who was also my friend. He had very low tolerance for boredom, and I know this will resonate with many people because this guy would mostly struggle with boredom during the late hours of the night. Remember how I talked about revenge, bedtime, procrastination on episode number 7, lacking motivation in China? My friend didn't lack motivation. In fact, he was passionate about his goals in China, but he was so busy during the day that he would simply refuse to go to bed at night, clinging to the very last hours of the night before he would have to wake up and engage in his academic affairs. He would watch entire animes, popular series, and movies. He had to watch something every night before bed, otherwise he would refuse to go to sleep. And I totally get it. I totally get it. Consuming digital media late at night is fun, but in my opinion, Doing it too often is a clear sign of high sensation seeking and boredom susceptibility. It doesn't mean that wanting to experience new things and being bored is bad. But if you notice a repetitive pattern and you feel an irresistible urge to experience new things, this could be presented as impulsive online shopping, video game or social media addiction, food binging, pub crawling or bar hopping, or if you simply can't spend a moment alone, chances are that you have big sensation-seeking traits and most likely higher boredom susceptibility. If you want to know more about sensation-seeking, I'll leave some links in the description of this episode. So, like I said at the beginning of this episode, my sleeping habits almost ended up killing me. But in my case, I think I can say I have experienced voluntary and involuntary insomnia and hypersomnia. And I'm not sure if that makes sense to you, but the main problem I had was sleep apnea, which is a medical condition that prevents you from breathing smoothly while you sleep. The symptoms of this condition show in the shape of snoring, migraines, and weight gain. I know that people think that snoring is either funny or annoying, but in reality, is a warning sign of something much more serious. In my case, I touched rock bottom when people began telling me about my eyelids and lips and the tips of my fingers turning purple during my sleep. Also, I would often gasp for air or sleepwalk. While sleeping, I would move so much that I would sometimes fall from the bed and hit my back, shoulders, or head. I don't know why I moved so much. I guess it was my body trying to wake me up from my hypoxic state. I went to the hospital and doctors performed a couple of exams on me. At first, they pointed at the most obvious factors such as weight, deviated septum, and bone structure as the main factors of my possible apnea. They sent me home with this device that you put on your chest near your heart area for 2 nights to measure your heartbeats and blood oxygenation throughout the night. The report would show them how many times I would stop breathing per hour. When I went back for them to check the readings from the device, they were shocked. They were looking at something called AHI, which stands for Apnea Hypopnea Index, which is counted in multiples of 5. So listen, every time that you stop breathing for more than 3 seconds within 1 hour, the AHI value would increment by 5. So, to give you an idea of how severe my apnea was, the average person has an AHI value of 5. Mine was 95. Shut the front door. It meant that for every hour I was quote-unquote sleeping, I would stop breathing for more than 3 seconds on at least 3 or 4 occasions. God. Luckily, I got a prescription for a continuous positive air pressure machine, also known as CPAP machine, that expands my airways. It was super uncomfortable at first and it makes me look like an elephant, but I got used to it and I sleep like a baby now. After a week of proper sleep, people around me noticed how my mood improved 100%. Like I became a different person almost. I became less of an angry foreigner. My concentration and memory improved a lot as well. And 6 months later, I lost like 30 kilograms with very little exercise. The biggest problem with apnea is that it's a vicious circle. Since I was never reaching deep sleep, my cortisol levels would skyrocket and my body would stop producing leptin, which is the weight regulator and hunger inhibiting hormone. So since I never had enough energy to function during the day, I learned to gain that energy from food and sugar. Hence the weight increase that would later on contribute to the pre-existing air blockage. So yeah, that was my survival story with apnea. If you know someone who snores a lot, or if that someone is you, and you want to know more about apnea, you might want to check out some of its symptoms. I'll leave the link in the description as well. But only because I was able to overcome apnea doesn't mean I'm exempt from experiencing any other type of sleeping problems. Just like anyone else, I have experienced sleep bedtime procrastination. I tend to seek new experiences and have low boredom tolerance. I don't particularly struggle with hypersomnia or insomnia, but I often refuse to go to bed or refuse to get out of bed. It gets much easier once I turn all my electronic devices off and close my eyes, or once I get both feet out of my bed and drink some water. But then I realized that instead of watching an hour-long documentary about the history of pencils before bed, Maybe, if I truly want to watch such a thing, it would be okay for me to make some time in the morning to watch stuff like that. Unless it feels like a waste of time. Unless it's an actual waste of time. So it's interesting because if you're like me, you probably think that wasting time during the day is unjustifiable, but wasting time during the late hours of the night is a-okay. I've also realized that my own sensation seeking at night is sometimes an attempt to make sense of my days. Like, for example, after a busy day, I've invested so much in other things and other people, but so little in myself. But for some reason, I only give some thought to it when I'm lying down on bed, staring at the ceiling right before midnight. Have you heard this quote from Soren Kierkegaard that says, "Life can only be understood backward, but it must be lived forward"? Sometimes I think the same can be said about days. Think of the opposite of waking up early, doing some work during the day, seeking sensations, and fall asleep late at night. That would be waking up late, seeking sensations, do some work during the day, and go to sleep early. It makes much more sense, right? But it's not that simple. Our sleeping habits are mostly defined by our responsibilities and our ability to function properly during the day in spite of sleep deprivation. And in many cases, depriving yourself from sleep is what leads you to oversleeping. I feel that whenever I give people advice, I'm often giving advice to myself because I guess it's much easier to tell people what to do than to tell yourself what to do. Especially when you know exactly what you need to do but still don't do it. But giving advice to people can sometimes make things clearer in your mind. And it certainly gives you a better perspective of what's happening around you and inside of you. My realistic advice for you today is, before you postpone your bedtime, ask yourself why. Why is this happening? Could this be due to some medical or psychological condition? Maybe some chemical or hormonal imbalance or stress and anxiety. If that is the case, seeking professional help is the way to go. But if that is not an option for you because you can't afford it or because professional help is unavailable in your area, you're going to have to make do with what you have and make the necessary changes to have good sleeping habits. Today, I'm not here to tell you how to sleep better. I think you already know what you have to do, and if not, you can find out with just a quick Google search. But what I can certainly tell you about is habits, because quitting a habit is really difficult, if not impossible. What you can change, however, is the routines and other habits that lead you to delaying your bedtime or oversleeping. For example, if texting or phone calls from family members and friends back home are making you delay your bedtime, well, you're either going to have to choose another time to call or set a specific date to talk with them. Now, if you keep a journal of your feelings and emotions throughout the day and you see that boredom kills you right before bedtime, then think one step ahead and plan to seek sensation in a way that doesn't affect your bedtime. So if you want to watch the history of pencils on YouTube, don't wait until it's 1 a.m. to start watching it. Watch it during breakfast or lunch. If you can't handle boredom or you can't fall asleep, you're going to have to vary your routines and bedtime rituals and see what works best for you. If watching videos on your phone is keeping you awake, set an alarm and put your phone far away from bed so you have to get up to turn it off and reduce the chances of you oversleeping. Or try to listen to music or the sounds of whales to remove any visual stimuli so you can at least close your eyes and attempt to fall asleep. You have to negotiate with yourself. You can't have the best of both worlds when it comes to sleeping. You cannot have consistent sleeping habits and learn how to peel oranges with your fingers on YouTube at 3 a.m. You know what I mean? Now, my genuine encouragement for you today is, if you have messed up sleeping schedules, remember that you're not alone. You can see people being totally functioning in the morning, but you don't really know if they had a good sleep last night. I bet that if you talk to friends and family about this, at least half of them will admit having inconsistent sleeping habits. Talking about it with someone might be the first step to get the help you need. I like to finish every episode with a quote, and today's quote is by Umberto Eco, and it says, "Daytime sleep is like the sin of the flesh. The more you have, the more you want, and yet you feel unhappy. Sated and unsated at the same time." Let me repeat that. Daytime sleep is like the sin of the flesh. The more you have, the more you want, and yet you feel unhappy. Sated and unsated at the same time. Alright, that's it for today. Next week I will talk about idealizing in China, because things are never as perfect as we think. Things are not just black and white, good or bad, and yet we keep idealizing people, cities, countries, and cultures. Is there anything you have idealized in China before? We'll cover that in next week's episode. You have just listened to China University Podcast. This was Chimsy, your student advisor. I'll see you next week.